Hello everyone, and welcome to the third part in our series of looking beyond physical diagnosis. Just a few things of housekeeping to get started. Just to remind you all, it is being recorded this evening, as we have done in the previous weeks, that this is an educational session. It's not medical advice. We're not medical practitioners, so just be wary of that. And as we said before, the cameras are off, as this is a three-way conversation. We are inviting you to put your questions and points in the chat, and we recognise that this might be a bit disconcerting for everyone. This week we do want to run it slightly differently in that we are going to take questions at the end. So please do put your questions in chat and we will bring you in, if you so wish, to the session. You can turn on your camera, turn on your audio and join the session. Thank you for all the feedback that you have been giving us. It's been great. We've really enjoyed it, and we would ask you to, again, please use the feedback button on the recordings page to give us more feedback. It's very helpful. And yeah, thank you very much. So just to kind of introduce the session, Looking Beyond Physical Diagnosis is a three-part wellbeing series for families dealing with the emotional challenges that can accompany diagnosis or disability. We will be exploring the premise that when facing illness or disability, despite any changes in lifestyle or circumstances, our well-being is fully available. And tonight we are discussing the title, Is Lightheartedness Realistic? And what we're going to be talking about effectively is how we see lightheartedness and how we found it. And I was voted the person to start the proceedings tonight, so I have to kind of I didn't want to take some notes, so I'm just going to kind of start speaking. As I mentioned last week, part of my journey, as it were, towards lightheartedness, as we said before, sorry, my microphone keeps getting caught on my shirt, is that I had a conversation with, I remember having a conversation with George, Linda's partner, and I could see that in myself I was, let's say, not living in a state of lightheartedness. I had, previously when I first came across this understanding, I was very grumpy. I was very aggressive. Angry, an angry young man, let's call it, and I had an insight around seeing that was coming from my thinking, and that my state of mind was dependent on how I was thinking at any moment, and I was creating that reality for myself. And so I effectively, once I could see that where it was coming from, my low moods, my anger, my frustration all started to change. Now, later down the line, I met George, and it was like an innocent conversation in a lot of ways, but I recognized that I wasn't living in a state of lightheartedness. I wasn't living in a state of general happiness. I was still quite I don't want to say grumpy, because I was no longer aggressive and rude and I didn't shout at people, but I wasn't happy. Like, I wasn't showing up in the world with a smile on my face. But yeah, I recognized that I could. And I could see that was coming from exactly the same place, meaning I could see that I was coming into the world or whatever, like that there was a lot of thinking getting in the way of me just showing up with a smile on my face. I don't know how else to put it, but that I could be lightheartedness but for that thinking. And over time that changed, because I guess what I saw is that it's my thinking that gets in the way. My own thinking gets in the way of taking life with a smile on my face, of showing up with happiness and joy. Like that by nature, even though I didn't see it at that point. Like by nature, I am, and everyone is lighthearted. Like we are created that way. You know, you see it in little children that they are full of joy, and they don't take life too seriously, and yet our thinking gets in the way of that, and we learn to take things more seriously. Like there are certain things that need to be treated with a level of seriousness, and so we lose that light-hearted approach. Now, that's what I think gets in the way of it. And I'm not. And again, we're going to kind of discuss that further. But that's what how I think that things have changed and changed over a period of time for me. In that I don't. It's not that I'm working on being lighthearted, because I'm not. It's not that I am trying to aggressively, you know, move my thinking or my experience or my lightheartedness or seriousness in a certain way, but I have come to see that it is my thinking about circumstances in life and things that happen to me that will take me out of that lightheartedness and that happiness and joy, just being, you know, a positive soul in the world. So yeah, Claire, Linda, what's your take?
I think I was voted next, wasn't I, when we talked about it? So I love what you said, Julian, about it being our thinking and that our innate nature is essentially lighthearted. And I was really curious, so I looked up lightheartedness in the dictionary, and it said, free from worry, care, anxiety, or seriousness. And for me, that's kind of a really fascinating point, because I definitely used to think that how seriously I took something and how much I worried about it and how anxious I was about it was a direct correlation to how much I cared. Mm-hmm. And that, for me, that was something that, I mean, it just, or not only how much I cared, but I was being realistic. It was responsible. That it, yeah, that it showed how much I cared. And then I came to see that that's not true. It's just not true. Caring has nothing to do with how much you worry. And in fact, the more lighthearted I can be about something, the more freedom of mind I have around it, the more inventive and creative I can be, the more responsive to the moment I can be, the more loving, the kinder, the more compassionate, both to other people and to myself. So we're obviously talking about in terms of diagnosis. I'm going to be talking in terms of my disability. So lots of people are often very surprised at how kind of lightheartedly I take my disability. But the thing is that I don't really take it that seriously these days. It's not that I don't mean that in a disrespectful way, and I've said this before in these webinars, I'm totally aware of it, but it's not something I dwell on. It's not part of my awareness or consciousness. And it's not something that I believe is something that I have to take really seriously. I've said this before as well, and I hope that no one finds this offensive, but I see my disability as a tool for growth, both emotional growth, spiritual growth, and a challenge which I have overcome. And through overcoming it, that journey of overcoming it has definitely enriched me massively as a person. And also, for me, when people are not feeling serious or anxious or worried about something, and they get to a place of acceptance, a place where they're going, what do I mean by acceptance? They're going, well, this is how it is. I might not like it. I might not have chosen it, you know, but this is how it is. And then for me, it's like we had a couple of questions about, oh, is this, if I accept something, does that mean I just have to kind of lie down and like be taken over by it? You know, do I give up? But for me, acceptance is a place where you kind of, it's almost like a clearing of the decks. It's like, okay, this is what is, and what can I do with that? How am I going to live with that going forward? And in the process of accepting it, there's a kind of, when I began to accept my disability, I was able to be much more loving to myself. You know, in a place of anger, frustration, denial, I certainly wasn't in a place where I was compassionate and kind to myself. And also, I really, you know, for me, another reason why I think I'm able to be more lighthearted about my cerebral palsy is that I don't see it as the totality of my being. It's definitely part of me, like no question, and it's definitely informed my experience of the world, but there is more to me than my physicality. And we've touched on this before as well in some of the other webinars. There's an essential clearness. Like in one of the other webinars, Linda spoke so beautifully, and it really touched me about when George first had his stroke, how she went to the hospital to see if she could see George, if the Georgeness of George was there. And then when she saw that seeing that gave hope. And I think that, you know, if whether you're living with a disability yourself or a diagnosis, or you're caring for somebody, from a place of kind of lightheartedness and love, that's such a beautiful place of possibility, going back to what we've been talking about before, and we talked about in the first session. So that's why I would say that not only is lightheartedness possible in my experience, but it's incredibly beneficial.
Okay, so my turn to talk about lightheartedness. So for me, it's been quite a journey back to lightheartedness, and I'm really kind of just approaching it. And it's been really interesting in that, and I mentioned this either probably both the first and second webinar, that when I first heard that George had a stroke, it really threw me into a lot of anxiety. I lived in a lot of anxiety for a while before I realized hope and grabbed onto hope. And then that hope morphed into gratitude, and I lived in gratitude, which was wonderful. The feeling of gratitude. And then what's happened recently is that I've had the feeling of coming back to myself. It's like coming home. Now, home to me is a version of lightheartedness, but home to me is the feeling that I lived in before George's stroke. And that feeling was really, for me, my version of lightheartedness is enthusiasm for life. I have always lived in a lot of enthusiasm. And I guess joyfulness about living, just being in life and seeing what's going to happen, you know, in the morning, and how the day is going to unfold, and having thoughts about what to do that would be fun, and feeling grateful about my life. And it's interesting, I'm coming back to that feeling, I'm coming home. And I haven't really done anything to make that happen. In other words, it's been an unfolding of anxiety, hope, gratitude, and then coming home. It's been an unfolding that I feel like I haven't really had anything to do with, except possibly from my understanding that states of mind change. I'm wondering if my understanding of and belief in that states of mind change has anything to do with it, I don't know. But it just feels like an evolutionary process. And it's been an adventure. It's been quite an adventure. And in this new feeling of going home, this, like I said, that's just kind of unfolding and starting to happen to me, where I'm coming back to my own feeling in me of lightheartedness, which is, like I said, my version of lightheartedness is enthusiasm for life. I'm seeing George different. I'm seeing him differently. I'm more willing to let him struggle to learn and not jump in and, oh, here, I'll do it. It's too hard, I'll do it for you. I just feel more confident in his ability to be alone without me. I feel less involved in his moods if he goes down, which he's done as a result of the stroke. He tends to be more moody and he'll drop into a mood, and I'll be, oh, no, let me help you out of this mood. You know, it's hard enough being in a stroke or being a stroke victim without being in a mood. Let me help you. And it's like I'm standing back and going, well, he can be in a mood, work it out. He can do that. So I have a lot more, from my state of mind of being more in a feeling of myself, a feeling of home, a feeling of lightheartedness. It's changed how I see him. And I'm allowing him more independence, more struggling to learn on his own, and having faith in that he'll work out his, if he gets caught up in his mind, in his thinking, frustrated or down, or he'll work it out. And I really like that perspective of him, and I like the feeling that I've landed in. And I've also landed in the kind of the thinking of, you know, I don't want to think of him like I talk about him as like pre-stroke and after stroke. You know, I refer to him before the stroke and after stroke. And I kind of like, I don't want to do that anymore. I don't want to think about the stroke. And it was a bad stroke. It's not like it was a little one. It was a bad one. And he's come a long way. And like some days he has good days and some days he has bad days. And when he has bad days, I would think about it as, well, his stroke behavior. You know, and his good days I think of as, well, he's coming out of his stroke and learning. And it's like, now I'm like, it's kind of like off the table. It's just George. It's just George. It's not before stroke George and after stroke George. It's just George. Just George and me and our life. And we're going to live it how we live it. And he's going to be up against it how he's up against it. And I'm going to be up against it how I'm up against it. And it's just how everybody is. So everybody is up against life in their own way. Like Julian's up against it, and Claire's up against it. You all are up against it at times, you know, and then you find your way out and learn something new. So in a way, I know I didn't feel this way at the beginning, but from my state of mind now, and even in my state of mind when I was in the feeling of hope and gratitude, my life felt like an adventure. And I don't know if you can relate to the feeling of life being an adventure. And when life's an adventure, it gives you a sense of what's next and and I can deal with it, or I can see how to negotiate it, or I can embrace it, or I can do it. I can do it. I can do an adventure. Like I can do it. And that's where I am. And I feel so grateful in that unfolding of coming home and back to myself. I feel grateful. Now, I can talk about that in terms of my understanding about resiliency and what Julian said at the beginning of his talk when he said, you know, it's by nature people are lighthearted. Well, by nature, and I would use a different word, by nature people are resilient. By nature, people's spirits will go up if their thinking doesn't bring them down. If you can see the difference in yourself, you can see that change where there are some times when your spirits go up and you're lighthearted. And then your thinking comes in and you start getting insecure or frightened, and then your spirits go down. And just to see that, to appreciate that, is on the road, on the right path, on the right trail, so to speak. Because when people see that way that human beings are, that their spirits want to go up, but we can compress it by using our will, our free will with thought, free will and thought to compress it. But when we just see that activity as human beings, we start to get a learning curve around that. We will get a learning curve and see how to negotiate that for ourselves. In other words, we get better and better at allowing our spirits to go up. And we get better and better about getting out from under thought. We learn, we're learners. We're learners, we are learners. And like Claire said, it's been, for me, this has been, what occurs to me is character building. It's been really character building for me. I mean, I've had to learn some things, and I've gotten better at life, and I've gotten better at a lot of. I've gotten faster at getting over myself. Like when I get reactive, like for example, one of the things that I have to negotiate that I've learned is that George has, for whatever reason, has unstable blood pressure. So in certain situations, which I've started to understand, he can have pretty severe blood pressure drops. So like we could be at a restaurant and I got to get him on the floor and get his feet up. It's that kind of trauma, right? Well, I've learned not to freak out about that. I've learned to keep my bearings, keep my state, not let thinking crowd in and freak out, but just kind of keep my bearings and just do what I need to do to negotiate it. And you can do that. You can kind of get over yourself, get over your freak out, or get over your upset, or like sometimes, like when like people have talked about, how do you keep your bearings around the suffering of your partner? Well, you know, when George would suffer, and he did. When George would suffer, it would be I go with him. I just go down the suffering hole, down that rat hole of suffering with him. But, you kind of intuitively know that's not going to help. It's not going to help. It's not going to help you, and it's not going to help him. So I've had a learning curve about keeping my own bearings, keeping my own spirits up and helping him the best I can with that suffering by keeping my own spirits up and not getting into my own thinking about his suffering. Because really, when I get into my thinking about his suffering is when I start to suffer. When I get into my thinking about what he's suffering about and how he's suffering is when I start to get into my own suffering. And so I'm getting better at keeping out of that thinking so I can kind of just be with him, and just, here's the thing, here's what matters. The presence of another human being that has a neutral mind, the presence of another human being that has a loving mind, the presence of another human being that has a lighthearted mind is very stabilizing to someone who's suffering. Very stabilizing. If you want to stabilize your partner, you want to help them, you come in, it's a comfort. It's very comforting. And George has said that to me. He said it at times, like when I've been able to maintain my own state of mind, neutral or loving or stable. He says you're very comforting. You comfort me. You comfort me. Now, what better gift could you give to your partner when they're suffering than the feeling of comfort? But see, that's been a big learning for me because I had to learn to stay out of my own devices, so to speak, to stay out of my own thinking, out of my own reactivity. Because anyone that can stay out of their own reactivity or get over it really fast goes into a neutral mind. A neutral mind is a stable mind. A neutral mind is a lighthearted mind. A neutral mind is a loving mind. A neutral mind is a comforting
mind. I love what you've been saying, Linda. There's lots of kind of parts to that, but the one thing that keeps kind of coming to me, and I think Claire touched on this before and we spoke about it, but yesterday, is like life isn't personal. Like we put our personal take on it, so it feels like the things that are happening are kind of being personally kind of I don't know, I want to say punishment or whatever. Like I'm in a state of suffering because life shouldn't be like that, and it's happening to me. It's about it's me. I'm the one that's struggling with it, and this is hard, and life is hard, and all of that kind of stuff. But it isn't a personal experience. Claire, you spoke about this when we were talking about it, but I have also come to see that like the diagnosis of my daughter and also my son who's next door, maybe you could hear him screaming a little bit, but it's not that is not a good or bad thing in this, like I can see that as a bad thing. I can see her injury and his diagnosis as something that is, a very personally bad thing that I didn't want. But now I don't want to say like I see it like this, but I kind of do see that there's a logic in this, in that it just that situation is, it's not good or bad. It just is. Now, if I start feeling upset about it or distressed by it or unhappy with it, it's because of my taking it personally. It's not about the situation. The situation just neutrally is what it is, and we learn to see life and its circumstances as a very kind of personal judgment on ourselves. Like we take it personally. We take those things personally. And as a result, we get caught up in it. And so what you were saying about, showing up to George with that loving calm, like I have had that with my wife, and I also very often have it with my son. And a lot of the times with my son, I struggle with it massively. Like he can, be very difficult. He has behavior issues, so it can be very difficult. But I do my best in the circumstances, and it's a work in progress. Like you said, it's a journey. It's the life is this journey, and I see more and more that it isn't a personally, kind of upsetting experience. It just is. How I feel about it and how I show up is really, it's really down to me, I guess.
Well, I think, Julian, you make a really good point, because I think innocently people decide how their lives should be, and they set goals, and they have expectations about how life is going to happen for them, and what they're going to get out of life, and so forth and so on. And then life comes in with something that they didn't want. Life comes in with something that they didn't want. And just that I know that when I reverse that for myself, and essentially it's like life shows up. Life shows up, and I add the personal nature of it is I didn't want that. That's the personal. Yeah, I didn't want that. Well, all you have to do is take the I didn't want that off, and it becomes impersonal. I don't know if that's clear to people, but it's when I remember having a client one time that took everything personally. She was constantly getting her feelings hurt. And she had this insight, and she said to me, you know what I realized? All I had to do was take the to me off. I said, well, what do you mean? She said, well, this person behaved in that way towards me. That person said that to me. And she said, all I had to do was take the to me off. And it was like, that person said that. Had nothing to do with me. It's just that's what they said. And she worked it out for herself, how not to take people personally, what they said and did.
Right.
That was.
That's so beautiful. I want to make sure we leave the time for people to ask questions that we said that we were going to do. But I just want to say one thing, which is, Linda touched on so many amazingly beautiful points, and I love what you said about seeing George as George. I see me as well, and that's just that's a very, very profound point.
Well,
the person is not their diagnosis. That's why this is called looking beyond diagnosis, because they're not their diagnosis or their suffering or their condition or whatever it is. And the other thing I wanted to pick up on as well was I've learned through the lessons of my disability, I've learned how resilient I am. I know without a shadow of a doubt that whatever happens to me in my life, good or bad, I will find a way through. Like that is not even in question for me. And I'm not saying that I'm expecting all my life to be good, because it's just life is life. As we're saying, it shows up, and it's always an invitation. Things happen in your life, and then you have an invitation and to choose how you navigate them. But I know that I have the capacity to adapt and change. So I'm resilient, and I will find a way through. And that to have that kind of solid kind of belief as a foundation is remarkably freeing and comforting to me. So that I just wanted to add those two things to what you said, Linda.
Well, I wanted to say that when I first met you, that's what stood out to me about you, was how little concerned you were and how little you identified with your disability. And it was so eye-opening and refreshing. And it was like, wow, I didn't know people could do that. I didn't know people could be that way with a disability. Like, just kind of understand it, but not pay attention to it like you did. It was so impressive, Claire. And I thought that would be, well, I hoped other people saw the same thing I did. And I don't know, they probably did. I don't know, but
And what I loved in what you said, is what I heard you say is you've got to that place through your journey with George. You're now at that place.
Yeah.
And that's so beautiful, because it takes all of that thinking that it was taking up in the last couple of years off your mind. So now you can really enjoy being with George and enjoy your life again. As you were saying, you feel like you've come home to yourself now. You know, you're reaching equilibrium. And that's so hopeful and possible for everyone, I believe.
Well, should we open it up to questions?
Yeah. I mean, we have had a couple of great questions already in the chat, and I'm happy to read them out. And if the people want to kind of jump in, then they're more than welcome to. They can raise their hand if I read out your question, or send more questions too. Should I read this out? I don't want to invite someone on in case they don't want to, you know, kind of appear. So I'll read it out.
You could ask them if they have their name. You could ask them if they.
I know, but they might want to be anonymous. So I'm just, you know, conscious of the feedback on the feedback form. Some of that's been anonymous as well. So I'll read it out, and if this person wants to jump in, and you know, we can start to answer it, and we'll see. So this question is, and I love this question because it resonates a lot with me personally. I feel like I'm the exception. I can get this understanding on a psychological level, but can't seem to transfer it to real life. I feel I am a failure. I have been in this conversation for a couple of years, yet still experience much sadness and confusion. I lose my patience often with my daughter, and I do resent her sometimes. I find her personality so difficult to deal with. When will I be free and model freedom for my beloved girl? Why can't I just let go and get it like the rest of you?
Well, here's what I would say to that person. I don't know if you're really looking at incremental change in yourself. I bet you anything, if you looked, or maybe even asked somebody that's close to you, if you're better at it, if you are more patient, if you are more resilient. See, people tend to think black and white. I'm either good or at this, or I'm bad at this. And they don't look at incremental progress. And that would be my advice to you, is look for incremental progress.
Yeah. I mean,
sorry, go ahead.
So this person says that they do want to kind of jump in. So go on, you answer that, and I will, or I can bring her in now. So I can ask her to unmute, and just give me a second. Ask to unmute. Here you go. Hi.
Hi, hello, thank you. First of all, I just want to thank all of you. I have been in so many 3P conversations, and I really needed this. I needed like it from this perspective of what I'm going through. So I found this really helpful, and thank you to Maria, whoever you are, who sent me the info on it. I don't know if you're on here today. I'm almost embarrassed at showing my face in yet another free webinar where I'm still really struggling. And you're right, Linda. Like, when my daughter was first diagnosed with a brain disorder 4.5 years ago, I didn't want to get out of bed. I had to literally like convince myself to put one foot in front of the other. And now life is different. So there is growth there. I do see a shift, but it's still a lot of suffering. And when I hear you say things like your strength and your mood helps lift your husband, and like, I know that my daughter, who's now 17, she was 12 at the time, she's really confused a lot of the time, and she's really in a low mood. I find it extremely difficult to deal with because I honestly don't know what part is her brain inflammation, what part is she's a teenager who can't do much more than sit on a chair most days. Is it her reactive personality? She's always kind of been a drama queen. Like, and then I do resent. I also heard you say, you're so glad you weren't in resentment for your husband. I think it was the previous webinar you were talking on. My God, I have so much resentment for her. And so what happens is I have good days where I show up as love and I really see her. And then it's like a pressure cooker. Something will happen and the top blows. And I just say what I have to say, what I'm feeling. And then I'm left to pick up the mess and the pieces. And I have such guilt.
Okay, here's the question. Are you okay with feeling resentful?
Sorry, am I okay with feeling?
Are you okay with feeling resentful?
Oh, as long as I don't tell her. But I do end up saying, how do you think it feels for the rest of us who have to,
I want to say just very quickly, I know I said at the top, like I relate to this because I'm at the same, like, I don't know if I've even mentioned this, my son who's next door, I said to Claire when we came on the call tonight, you might hear him screaming because he has an autism diagnosis, and he's playing a computer game and he kind of gets very aggressive and can get quite behavioral and start screaming and shouting and slamming things around. And so there are times that I go for exactly what you're talking about. Sometimes I can get incredibly reactive to him. He can start pushing me around. He can start shouting at me, slamming doors in my face, like literally like in my face, right?
Yes.
So, but I love Linda's question, what she just said, like, I'm okay with being resentful. Like I'm okay with him pushing my buttons because he's 16 and a teenager, sounds like they're the same age, right?
Yeah.
Or more or less. And it might be, maybe he's a teenager, maybe it's his diagnosis, maybe it's just his personality, maybe all of these things, but none of that really matters. The only difference, so to speak, between when I show up to him with love and understanding or resentfulness and frustration is when I kind of start taking it personally and get resentful towards him. And I'm okay with that, but I accept that's just how it goes. That sometimes I'll be like that and sometimes I won't. And incrementally, as Linda says, like, it's true. Like, I'm doing 10 times better than I was 10 years ago. But I'm not perfect in the same way that he isn't and you aren't and all of us aren't. That's how just it works.
So I have a really simple system for what you're going through with your daughter, because there are times, as much as I talk about living in hope and gratitude and how much I love him, and I just love being with him. Sometimes I get really impatient with him. And sometimes I get very proud of myself because I don't act on my impatience. And then sometimes I act on it. And he hates it when I act on my impatience. I get very impatient and I act on it. And I know I'm acting on it and I can't help it. And I'm like, here I go down, here I go down the water slide.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, my system is, at some point, I realize I've made a mess and I see him fold because his mind, he gets overstimulated and closes down, and I go, and I feel like a terrible person. I'm such a terrible person. But then what happens is that I get humble and I apologize. I go, Georgie, I am so sorry I got impatient. I am so sorry I got impatient. I am so sorry I got impatient. Will you forgive me?
Yeah.
And it works out great. And we start over. If that's the past, we forgive, we erase, and start over.
Okay, Linda, I hear you. And I so appreciate what Julian said as well. It just makes me feel less of a monster.
No,
And
all you have
Linda, like,
guys, all you have to do is get humble and say, I'm sorry.
I did do that this morning, I have to say. And, you know, she did. And there are times where I say sorry and she's just, you know, not ready to forgive me and still thinks I'm a horrible mom. And that's just hers. But how about this? And this is, and I don't want to take up everyone's, like, this last thing I'll ask is, you know, when you say it's not the outer circumstances, I can feel myself fighting that, because it's like, I look at my life and my daughter's calling me, you know, by 8:30 in the morning, something I never thought I'd hear, you know, and then my, you know, her cousin, who's 2 days apart from her down the street with my sister, you know, they're on a bike ride. So, like, isn't it, of course, easier for my sister Elizabeth to have like a peace of heart than, like, I keep hearing it's not, okay, it's not the circumstances, it's how I'm thinking, it's how I'm thinking. But God, it feels like I really want to say, it's not that easy.
Well, I'm not sure what you're asking. What are you
I'm asking, I'm guess when I'm not asking, I'm saying I find it really difficult to find peace in a lot of the situations I'm in.
Well, here's the thing is, what really, really, really helps me, don't compare. See, if you're looking
The big one.
if you're looking at relationships outside you and like seeing these mothers and daughters smiling at each other, and don't make, that's not your business. Don't compare.
Yeah. Thank you.
And I just want to say something about the outside in or inside out nature of life, because if it was outside in, we wouldn't on these webinars have had the conversation or the richness of conversation that we've been having. Because basically the three of us have been talking about the way in which we see the same things, but we've all been talking about them slightly differently. And that's because of the inside out nature of life.
Mary, thank you.
And one more thing. See if you can look at what you're doing right more than you look and get preoccupied with what you're doing wrong.
Yeah, I love that, because I really heard you picking yourself up.
If you can look at what you're doing, like, don't just glide over what you're doing right and your incremental changes. So, and then just focus on how you aren't there yet. Don't do that.
Okay. Yeah, I do that.
If I focused on what I couldn't do physically, I would be in a very, very, very different place. I don't focus on that.
Yeah.
Two minds as to whether to share this, June, because I think I know when you mentioned Maria, I think I know who you're talking about, because I shared this with her. And again, I'm in as I said, a similar situation. And again, I'm going to try this sounds like advice, but it's like, I realized, okay, rather than, let's say, beat myself up about, you know, how terrible a dad I'm being, but I realized that there's ways that I can help the situation by fostering a stronger relationship with my son, rather than just trying to do better in certain circumstances. It's like there's a bigger picture. That's all. That's all I want to say.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Okay. Thank you.
That was wonderful. Do you think we have time for one more question?
Yeah.
Yeah, we do. I mean, if someone wants to ask another question whilst we're waiting, we did have this point. It says, I'm wondering, how did each of you separate yourselves from the diagnosis, given that you all came to this in such different ways? At what point did you stop being what was happening to you and evolve back into what each of you were becoming?
That's a beautiful question. For me, it was that insight that I mentioned when I was 11 years old, where I saw I had a choice to see myself one way, you know, that I just saw that I was more than just my disability. That was a turning point for me. That that I wasn't just a disabled person, that it was part of me. And that insight that led to a choice.
It's interesting because I'm thinking about that question, and I was kind of saying, I don't know if I could put my finger on kind of what I did, but it's like a a question of over time realizing that I'm creating my experience. I've seen and experienced and had more insight every step along the way, and so it's been part of this journey. And it's like this question said, kind of like an evolving back into self, rather than there was something that specifically happened. It was more something that I started to see more and more.
And for me, it was like I didn't want to go to the dark side. I just didn't want to go to the dark. I didn't want to, and I knew I didn't have to, because there's in life, there's so much that's possible. People tell you things, they give you diagnosis, they put limits on, well, he won't be able to, drive it, he won't be able to. And it's like they put limits on you, and you don't know what's possible for people to evolve, to change, to grow, to transcend. You don't know. It's like anything's possible. So that's when I went, I don't want to go to the dark side. It's like anything's possible. It's possible to suffer less. It's possible to do better. It's possible for your state of mind to change. It's possible to find more resiliency. It's possible to learn. It's possible. It's possible. It's possible. That's what I saw.
So we have another question, and this person has asked if they can come on, so I'm going to bring them on, and she can ask her question herself. So let's just wait for her to come in.
Hi. I feel
Hi.
like Carlos Castaneda asking Don Juan the same stupid questions over and over again. And I know that the answer is always the same, but to me, I can't quite see it when it comes to physical suffering, like in your body. Like if you're in pain for a long period of time, or you're nauseated, or you have a shorter breath or something like that. It just seems like not as susceptible to the way you're thinking, because it's your body and it's like bypasses your thinking somehow. At least that's the way it looks to me.
Can I say something about this? So thank you so much for your question, and I really appreciate it. And also that I was asked a question directly that relates to this, about how to, about acceptance, really, when in the face of physical suffering. I don't know, but what I want to say is that for me, there are times when I am physically uncomfortable. But what I've noticed about that is the more I dwell on it, the bigger it gets, literally. And then there can be times when I can be in pain, and then I can be distracted by something else that's going on in my life, and there is no pain because I am absorbed by something different. And then I notice the pain again, right? So for me, it's not I don't think our experience is I think it's fluid, and it changes depending on where our consciousness and awareness is. So that's why I do think that this is relevant to physical illness. I do think that it is. Linda's nodding away.
Yeah, no, but I want to wait till you're finished.
But I did, so that's my personal experience, Andrea, not to, you know, I just wanted to say that that's my own personal experience of it, that it depends how much I'm thinking about it as to how I experience it or not.
I had a client once who came to me, and she came to me because I can't remember, there was some issue she was having. And she told me that she lived in chronic pain. And I went, oh, well, is that why you're here? Is that why you came to me? She says, oh, no, I've resolved my chronic pain. I said, really? She said, yeah. She said, I used to live in acute pain, and I realized how to make it go from foreground to background in my experience of it. And so I can live with it. She was able to negotiate her pain in a way, psychologically, where it went from the foreground to the background. And she said when she could do that, she could live with it. And in the background, it would kind of what Claire would said, it would come and go. When it was in the background, it would come and go. When it was in the foreground, all she could do was think about it. That's one thing I wanted to say, which I thought was fascinating to me, that what she said about that she'd worked it out for herself psychologically. The second thing is one of the things that George had a lot of, in which he hates with a passion, is nausea. He had a lot of nausea after a stroke, and he hates nausea. It's the one thing he hates in life, you know, besides overcooked fish. He hates nausea. But the thing is, people have a creative process. It's like I'm thinking of all kinds of things, researching the internet for nausea. We tried a million things for nausea that didn't work, or would work a bit and then stop. And we finally found something that worked. So don't underestimate don't give up on your creative process to think about things that work. Like finally what worked is we did homeopathy, and that worked. Go figure. But the traditional medication didn't work for him. Traditional nausea medication didn't work. Dramamine, these things that acupuncture. We tried all kinds of stuff. It finally found something that worked. So don't give up. Don't get discouraged and give up. Keep looking for things that might work for you. So 2 answers.
And I just want to add one more thing about it, if that's okay, just very quickly. For me, there's also a role that acceptance has to play again in this. So I had a car accident a number of years ago. I was rear-ended by a big bus in a small car. And anyway, so I hurt my knee, and it was very, very painful. And they told me there was nothing I could do about it. And I noticed then that there were times when the pain was really bad, when I was reflecting on it, and when I was, noticing it was really bad. And then there were times when it would vanish and it would come and go, depending on, as I said before, how much time I was spending thinking about it. But there was also something about accepting it that really helped me, because I wasn't fighting it. And for me, that's really, really helpful. And for me, acceptance is not a case of going, okay, I lie down, you can, have your way with me, whatever it is. I don't mean it like that. I mean it in the way that Linda just mentioned, and that's why I'm bringing it up. For me, acceptance of it allows more space in my head, more bandwidth for creativity, more bandwidth for good ideas to come through, for wisdom to come through, for instinct, intuition, oh, I could try this, or I could try that. But when I'm fighting something and saying, no, there isn't the space for that. So for me, acceptance was really helpful.
Yeah. It's like, it's like the other thing that I don't know that I may have touched on this, but I don't believe in the experience and the thought and feeling of discouragement. I don't believe it. I don't believe in it. I don't believe that it's, I mean, I have it, but I feel like I am bigger than my experience and thought of discouragement, that I'm bigger than it, if you know what I mean. In other words, there's me and then there's discouragement. There's not discouragement and then a little me.
Yeah, I do. I go through periods where I feel like crying a lot. And then I find that if I do cry for 10 minutes, I feel better. And somehow.
Well, I don't know if we answered your question or not. I hope we did.
I have some things to think about. Yeah.
Okay.
And also, sorry, I know we keep, oh, she's gone.
Here.
Oh, you're still there. And also one last thing, and things just keep occurring to me. With that accident that I mentioned, people said, there's nothing we can do, but I didn't give up hope. Do you know what? And do you know what? I had this like revolutionary stem cell treatment and it's healed. And I don't have pain anymore. But I did not, and I was the first person, one of the first person in England to have it on that knee and blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. But I just didn't give up hope. Hope again, we're back to hope and the power of hope and the power of love and the power of acceptance and possibility.
I'm just struck by this and the connection to the question that we received on the feedback, because it's very much related. It's just, the question was about the person that they're caring for is in a lot of suffering. So it's the same kind of situation, but it's kind of when they're caring for someone, so they said, like, when my partner doesn't have such a bad day, I seem to feel better, but when they're having worse days, and there are a lot of those recently, I feel worse myself, or that's how it seems. My mood plummets on these days, and it could be we've answered this, they say, but I think you're saying state of mind can be independent of that. I think we have answered a lot of those, a lot of that, but I feel it's just worth mentioning now, just in case there's anything you two wanted to add.
Well, I could say me too.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
But there's there's again a learning curve for me, and then I get better and better at holding my own state of mind when George is suffering. I get better at it because I know that it doesn't have to be that way, and that I know that my stability is going to help him, not just help him settle down with his suffering, but also help me get creative about ways to help him. Because I don't necessarily think that if somebody's suffering, that they have to suffer perpetually. In other words, there are, like, what I love what Claire said, she figured out stem cell a treatment. I mean, there's all kinds of things out there in the world that you can find. Like I, found homeopathy.
Can I give you another example? Because I kind of mentioned it to the previous person when she was talking about her daughter, but like with my son, and kind of what I realized was he loves his computer games, right? So, and our relationship struggles because can be quite aggressive. So I realized, well, hold on, why don't I reach out to him and say, do you want to play some games? So I spend time with him every so often, playing games with him, right? I sit in his room, he loves it, we have a great time. And I mean, well, he has a great time and I kind of play along with it, but it's good. It's a solution for, well, I don't want to say a solution, but it's really helped that issue, that thing, because I've stayed in that kind of, as you said, that creative kind of mindset or place where I'm just kind of like, seeing the bigger picture. Like, okay, well, what next? What can I do to deal with that?
Yeah, and the thing is, see what look at. I really want to emphasize for everyone here that's suffering, that has disability, that's taking care of someone with disability. Look at what you're doing right.
Yeah.
Look at how you're learning. Look at what you're seeing that's new. Look at what you're discovering. Look at how creative you are. Look at what you're doing right.
And in answer to that question that you read out, Julian, like, I'm curious, like, I would be curious to look more in the direction of what you notice about when your mood lifts, rather than looking at when it doesn't or what brings it down. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing that Linda's saying. I'm saying the same thing. I'm just bringing it back to the question.
Look at what you're doing right.
Yeah.
Yeah, look at what you're doing right. Look towards resiliency. And don't, people give themselves such a bad time if they don't do what they think is right, or they don't do what they think they should be able to do, or they get so disappointed in themselves. And don't, if you can help it, just get over that as fast as you can. Get over your disappointment. Get over your bad feeling as fast as you can, and look towards your resiliency. Look to your resiliency.
And possibility and hopefulness and love.
Towards stability, hope,
compassion.
Look in that direction as fast as you can.
Okay, we're way over time, guys.
Yeah, and I think that's a great place to leave it as well. So thank you. Thank you all for coming, and thank you for being a part of it. I think, the three of us have thoroughly enjoyed it, and I hope you have as well. We have been kind of talking each week as part of our preparation, and we do want to do, more of these. And so that is in the pipeline as well. So look out for that. Until then, be in touch. Our website is thealmondtree.org, thealmondtree.org, and you can keep abreast of things over there. There'll be kind of interviews that we're going to be putting up on there, which might be worth watching and will be worth watching. That if you're not already, join our mailing list. But otherwise, we will see you soon, and we hope you found this helpful. So thank you very much.